Start with a chilling sound effect. Wind howling through trees, an owl hooting in the distance. Welcome to our channel. Today we dive into the most disturbing encounters in the woods. Viewer discretion is advised. Prepare yourself as we delve into tales of eerie figures, unexplained sounds, and encounters that will leave you questioning what lurks beneath the canopy. Our first story takes us deep into the heart of Appalachia, where a young woman named Sarah had a chilling encounter she can't explain. Sarah, an avid hiker, often ventured onto the trails near her rural home. One evening, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the path, Sarah noticed a figure in the distance. It was tall and slender, shrouded in a dark cloak or a long coat of some kind, its back to her. She paused, a shiver running down her spine. She called out a greeting, her voice echoing strangely in the stillness of the woods. The figure didn't turn, didn't even acknowledge her presence. It simply stood there, unmoving. A wave of unease washed over Sarah. She called out again, her voice louder this time, but still there was no response. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. Gathering her courage, Sarah cautiously started to approach the figure, keeping a safe distance, her heart pounding in her chest. As she drew closer, she noticed something strange about the way it stood, almost unnatural, as if it were balancing on the balls of its feet. And the longer she looked, the more certain she became that there was something off about its proportions, about its very shape. She stopped a few feet away, her mind racing with questions. Mustering her courage, she called out one last time, her voice trembling now. "Hello, can you hear me?" Silence. And then in a heartbeat the figure was gone. One moment it was there, the next it was simply gone, vanished into thin air. To this day she can't explain what she saw that evening in the woods, but the memory of the hooded figure still haunts her dreams. Our next story takes us to the remote wilderness of Yellowstone National Park, where a group of friends on a camping trip got a terrifying experience they'll never forget. There were 4 of them: Mark, Jennifer, David, and Emily. They'd been planning this trip for months, eager to escape the city and reconnect with nature. They set up camp near a secluded lake, the air crisp and clear, the only sounds the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the crackling of their campfire. As the sun began to set, casting long, dancing shadows through the trees, they shared stories and laughter, enjoying the camaraderie and the peacefulness of their surroundings. Later that night, huddled in their tent, their bellies full of roasted marshmallows and campfire stories, they drifted off to sleep. It was some time after midnight when Mark was jolted awake by a sound. It was a low, guttural growl coming from just outside their tent. He lay there, listening intently, his heart pounding in his chest. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy brushing against the side of their tent. Mark held his breath, afraid to move, afraid of what was lurking just outside. He slowly reached over and nudged Jennifer awake. "Jen, wake up," he whispered urgently. Jennifer stirred, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Something's outside," Mark whispered back, his voice trembling. "I heard something." Suddenly a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, coming from just outside their tent. It was a scream filled with such terror, such primal fear, that it sent chills down their spines. David and Emily, awoken by the scream, sat up in their sleeping bags, their eyes wide with terror. Chapter 3. The Cabin and the Blood Trail. This story takes us to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, where a lone hiker named Ben stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. Ben, an experienced outdoorsman, was on a week-long backpacking trip, enjoying the solitude and the beauty of the wilderness. One afternoon, as he was making his way through a particularly dense section of forest, he came across a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a small, dilapidated cabin. It was a crude structure, built of rough-hewn logs, with a rusted tin roof and a single boarded-up window. Curiosity getting the better of him, Ben cautiously approached the cabin. The air around it felt heavy, oppressive, as if a cold, unseen hand was pressing down on him. He circled the cabin, his eyes scanning the structure for any sign of life, any indication of who might have built it or why it had been abandoned. As he rounded the back of the cabin, he noticed something strange. There, on the ground, was a trail of something that looked like blood. It was dark and viscous, and it trailed from the edge of the woods, leading directly to the cabin's front door. Ben's heart skipped a beat. He crouched down, examining the trail more closely. The blood was still fresh, which meant that whatever had bled here had been here recently. He followed the trail to the front door, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife he carried on his belt. The door was slightly ajar, as if it had been forced open. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Dark. Our next story takes us to the sprawling forests of northern Maine, where a family's camping trip took a terrifying turn. John and Mary, along with their 2 young children, 8-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old Michael, were spending a week in a remote cabin, hoping to enjoy the peace and quiet of nature. The first few days were idyllic. They went for hikes, fished in the nearby stream, and roasted marshmallows over the fire pit as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. But as the week progressed, strange things started to happen. It began with Sophie, who claimed that she kept hearing someone whispering her name. At first, John and Mary dismissed it as her imagination running wild. But then Michael started reporting the same thing. He told his parents that he'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear whispers coming from the woods just outside their cabin. Then came the shadows. Michael swore he saw figures darting through the trees at the edge of their campsite, figures that seemed to vanish whenever he pointed them out to his parents. One evening, as the family was gathered around the fire pit, the flames crackling merrily, Sophie suddenly grabbed her mother's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Mummy, there's someone out there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where, honey?" Mary asked, trying to sound calm despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Out there in the woods," Sophie said, pointing to the darkened trees beyond the circle of firelight. John, his senses on high alert, slowly stood up and scanned the woods, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. The firelight cast flickering shadows, making it difficult to see clearly. Chapter 5. Hunted. Our final story takes us to the vast wilderness of the Canadian Rockies, where a seasoned hunter named Jake had an experience that shook him to his core. Jake had been hunting in these woods since he was a boy, taught by his grandfather to respect the power of nature and the creatures that inhabit it. He knew these woods like the back of his hand, or so he thought. One crisp autumn morning, Jake set off into the woods before dawn, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath misting in the cold air. He'd been tracking a large elk for days, its tracks leading him deeper and deeper into the wilderness. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, Jake noticed something strange. He had a feeling, a prickling at the back of his neck, that he was being watched. He paused, scanning the woods around him, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. He saw nothing, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. Jake continued on, his senses on high alert, his hand never straying far from the hunting knife sheathed at his belt. He'd been in these woods long enough to know that he was not alone. As he rounded a bend in the trail, he saw it, a flash of movement in the undergrowth ahead. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. The creature emerged from the undergrowth, and Jake's blood ran cold. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was large, easily the size of a bear, but it moved with a speed and agility that defied its size. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more spine-chilling stories. Stay safe out there. Remember, the woods hold many secrets, some best left undisturbed.